Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show. My name is Sasha Star, and I would like to welcome Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
And Ivan Kucherenko from Kiev, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello,
First
Stefan.
question,
Thanks
do
very
you have a video that you will show?
I have two videos actually, and
Great. Okay.
Wonderful.
the first one is very short, and I'd like to start with it.
Okay.
If you're
And,
okay with it.
let me introduce a couple of other people, but very important people. Nick Polivy, the founder of the network, who would participate in the show, and Mark Lee, welcome to the show as well. And let's start with the
video. Okay, I'll send everyone back. We'll start with the video.
Sorry? Let's start with Okay, that was a short video, Ivan. Is it my understanding, right?
Yeah, this actually what happens in Kiev during last days when Russians strike Kiev almost every day or even twice per day, like it was yesterday, and every night. And we have casualties, and you can see it from this video that it's kind of terroristic tactics.
Yes.
I think we don't need any other evidences to see that Russia is a terrorist state, and it should be blamed as terrorist state.
Well, you know what? I think the longer it will go like this, the most likely NATO and United States will get a little bit more direct involvement than it's doing now. Because right now they're supplying the all possible help, which will enable Ukraine to go for an attack. But it's not 100% what Ukraine needs right now. The Biden is hedging his moves very carefully. But I just don't understand one thing. There were so many red lines that Putin was not even openly proposed, but he implied certain red lines, which Biden was scared to death to cross, and then he crossed one line. And then several months later, yet another line. Then he crossed yet another line. Now the F-16s are being supplied, but not now. No. In 3 months, 4 months, 6 months maybe by the end of the year, or maybe never, because at the time the war will be over, hopefully. I think that there is something's going on in Russia, you know. For example, Ukrainian um, drones, or it's implied that it's Ukrainian drones. Nobody knows what kind of drones. Maybe they are flying from Indonesia, or maybe they're flying from North Korea, or maybe, who knows, maybe they're from Iceland just as well. But there are some drones are hitting Moscow targets, believe it or not. What is that? Isn't it a red line supposed to be? Jonathan, what's your opinion on that?
Thank you for tossing me that grenade. Yeah, I always wait. I always wait for Sasha. He goes on this long monologue, and then all of a sudden, here, Jonathan, what do you have to say? Thank you, Sasha. Well, the grenade is still live, isn't it? Okay, so what do I have to say about this? Is that okay? Ukraine is acquiring the means to strike Moscow deep, to strike Russia deep. They're getting them, if not from the United States itself, they are either improvising them on their own, or they are getting de facto capability to strike deep behind Russian lines. And this is evidence that we are not totally unified in our execution of our defense of our strategy against Ukraine. I mean, President Biden, say what you will, he has his own reasons and his own motivation for being cautious.
Agree.
Given that, he has perfectly legitimate reasons to be cautious. He has no real motivation to be a wild-eyed fanatic intent upon destroying Russia. What he would like to do is he would like to, in the tradition of past presidents under the containment strategy in the Cold War, he would like to contain Russia to prevent it from achieving its objectives without having to go to the ultimate brink of nuclear war or major intervention against Russia. He probably is not sure of the degree of support that he would receive from his own Congress or the American people for an all-out war. I mean, other previous presidents have had similar constraints placed upon them. President Harry Truman did not feel that he had the support to go to an aggressive war against China. As a matter of fact, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, when MacArthur was threatening to broaden the war to China, the Joint Chiefs of Staff said that a war with China would be the wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. So a president has to be able to make these balanced judgments. He cannot go all in on one particular course of action, because once you do that, there's no backing out. And so he has to have room in order to maneuver. Now, even so, the amount of aid that he has supplied and that NATO has supplied has certainly been enough to stymie Russia's advances and to prevent them from achieving their offensive objectives. Now the question becomes, because Ukraine has shown great skill in improvisation and in making the maximum use of the aid which they have gotten, now the question becomes, all right, Ukraine, it's in your hands. Can you deliver the decisive counterpunch? Yeah. And there is every evidence that, yes, Ukraine still has not committed its main forces for a decisive counteroffensive. They are looking for that best opportunity. And I would say we are being a little hasty in saying that, oh, yeah, we're not doing enough. We may be doing just enough for Ukraine to win its freedom and its independence by giving them the means. And the Ukrainians are taking the initiative. They are not sitting around on their hands waiting for us to do something. They're taking action themselves. And so it's just a matter of patience and waiting to see when and where Ukraine unleashes its counterpunch. Just like
Gentlemen, there are two conceptions, and one is that, in fact, Ukrainians will have only one chance to make a successful attack. And if it fails, the consequences are very unpredictable. Second theory goes that without F-16s, Ukraine will not be able to achieve its objectives. So there has to be punch number one as now, and gain substantial initiative, some maybe territories and so on, but at least the tangible success. And then to have major attack number two later on, maybe in August, September, preferably when F-16s already will be available for Ukrainians and so on. Ivan, what do you think?
Actually, we expected counterattack to start in spring, and obviously May is ending in 2 days, and no major counterattack started. I'm not sure that it will be a good option to start this attack in autumn when F-16 will arrive, because as we've discussed before, every day of Russia being occupied Ukrainian territories, civilians here suffer. They're being robbed, they're being raped, they're being interrogated, they're being murdered by Russian soldiers, which behave like
And the
barbarians.
kids are being taken away to Russia from Ukraine. That's
Yeah,
a big problem.
and everyone in Ukraine hope that this attack will start as soon as possible. But in the meantime, we understand that only one major Ukrainian attack will be not enough to liberate all occupied territories. So obviously there will be a second wave, second Ukrainian attack, and probably it will be in the autumn when it can be supported by the F-16 jet fighters. But being honest, I totally agree with you, and I can't understand why not to provide Ukraine with the required weapons, with the required vehicles, with required armament even earlier. Because why Western countries are waiting? Today, President Biden said that the question of ATACMS missiles is not postponed. Actually, that they're thinking about providing it, and why not just not to give those weapons to Ukraine as soon as possible and help us liberate our territories before Russia will destroy everything. And it's just a little bit stupid for me, and we really can't understand. They will give these weapons in the end, but why not to give them earlier? Why we have to wait? Why we have to see even more atrocities by being committed by Russia in order to give more weapons?
Red lines,
Part of
red lines.
yeah, part of that I would say, Ivan, is part of the reason, and it's not bureaucratic inertia. Yeah, as Clausewitz once pointed out in his book on war, yeah, even in the things that the courses of action are usually clear to the commander of what he ought to do, but even in war, even the simplest thing is difficult. You feel like you're moving underwater. And so your mind says, yes, we should do this. But then the commander or the political leader tries to transmit or communicate his desires or her desires to the people underneath him. And then there's this friction that's introduced, this inherent inertia. Now, modern communications does make it faster in some respects, but human nature, human flaws still manage to slow the whole thing down, and conflicting objectives. Einstein once said, politics is harder than physics. And he was only half joking, because in physics, at least you have laws, you have principles that will respond the same way each time you exercise them. When you're dealing with politics, you're dealing with a whole group of human beings, each of which has his or her own free will, and each of whom has their own differing objectives and feelings and attitudes towards the problem, which makes the whole idea of getting something done in politics infinitely more difficult than,
Uh,
because you're dealing with all these interactions of free will.
Nick, could you tell us,
Yes.
is law more complicated than politics or not?
Well, the politics is a big problem, what Dr. Lockwood pointed out. But Ivan, one problem we have here in the United States is lack of effective leadership in Washington. Even today, the policy of Ukraine has not been articulated and clear. To me, it's very clear. I would not condone the drone strikes on Moscow, nor would I allow drone strikes on Kyiv or any parts of Ukraine. And Biden needs to come out and articulate our policy. Our policy is to respect the integrity of the borders that Russia agreed to with Ukraine many years ago. And with that, we will do everything in our might, including sending fighters over to respect the integrity of those boundaries. We will not condone the drone strikes on Moscow, innocent people, because that's just one wrong creating another wrong. But we will do is we will send every available piece of material military might to drive them out of Ukraine, drive them out of Crimea, and restore the integrity of Putin's original word and the word of the Soviet Union, which to respect the integrity of the boundaries of Ukraine. That I would do. And I would add one more thing. If they send bombs from certain cities or from certain military bases in the Soviet Union, or which is now Russia, then those areas are now open areas to basically Ukraine, to sending bombs back to them. So the problem we have, though, in the United States, Ivan, is Biden, even today, has not articulated our U.S. policy toward Ukraine. And if he did, this war could be over very quickly.
Especially now when Russia is so much weaker in every
Of course.
respect, economically, the militaries, anything. They are so weak now. There is a great, Ivan, maybe you're following the latest news, that Putin's grip on power is becoming weaker day by day. There are several groups, never mind Prigozhin, and Kadyrov and many other clowns, but even his own generals, even his own advisors like Kovalchuk and others, they now taking him as a unwanted luggage, as a kind of a thing that you're about to throw away because it's just nothing but becoming a liability for you. Because without Putin, it's feasible that Russia could restore some kind of a peace, even temporary, with Ukraine and NATO and so on, and more or less trying to get a life as usual. But with Putin in power, it's impossible. Nobody can do it. No China, no Turkey, nobody else in the world. So we are moving and reasonably fast in spite of this business with F-16s or so, but we are still moving to the real calamity of Russian army in Ukraine, and therefore complete loss of the war. But it could go much farther than that. Jonathan, what do you think about this?
Yeah. Of all the things, it's the same thing that I was saying essentially before, is that we have to be do a very careful balancing act here. We want to be able, ideally, what would happen from our perspective is that Ukraine would be able to take the maximum advantage of the capabilities that we have given them and inflict such a serious operational reverse on the Russians that the Russians are finally very reluctantly made to see reason and pull back and say, okay, we're going to cut our losses for right now and just pull back. And that of course would allow NATO to consolidate, bring Ukraine into the alliance, and do a number of other good things that help Ukraine recover. It is not in our interest to engage in a prolonged forever war with no discernible objective. And we learned that lesson in Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, we had 20 years of essentially a forever war, with no discernible goal. We could never tell when we were actually winning and when we could actually cease our military involvement in Afghanistan. So the Nick is correct in that the president must articulate a clear goal that can be, because war is defined by the political objective. If you do not have a firm political objective, you do not have an efficient means for waging your war, because you
Correct.
never know, so long as you don't have a clear objective in mind, you never know when your military actions have in fact achieved that objective. That was also our problem in Vietnam. So
Right.
the political objective is paramount, and he is right. And because President Biden has had a great deal of difficulty in articulating a firm political objective and sticking to it, that creates a big problem. Now, one good thing at the operational level, as we have seen, because the Patriot has done even better than expected in creating a ballistic missile defense shield over the Ukraine, this gives it the Ukraine the opportunity, if it is able to get the means to launch deeper strikes behind Russian lines, they could, in fact, behind that shield, protecting them from deep strikes, they could inflict battlefield reverses on the Russian army and drive them out and cut off the Crimea, and in effect achieve their de facto objectives. And we would not be compelled to come out and state the to state the objective, to state it ourselves. Before the Battle of Gettysburg, remember Lincoln, when he appointed Meade to be the head of the Army of the Potomac 3 days before the Battle of Gettysburg took place. Okay, essentially, what Lincoln wanted Meade to do, Meade was expecting he was expecting Meade not to win the Battle of Gettysburg, just don't lose it. So it was kind of a negative objective. Defend Washington, don't lose the battle to Lee.
But,
So
but
now
how can there, Jonathan, how can
Go
there
ahead.
be peace? How can there be peace in a place like Ukraine and Russia when Russia has no problem violating their own international treaties? They have no problem lying to people, which they did in this case, when they mobilized around Ukraine and Putin said, well, we're not going to attack Ukraine. When you're dealing with a base liar who doesn't abide by their agreements, as they say, no justice, no peace. So the only way that we can have peace with Russia is to enforce the peace. And we have to enforce it with our enforcers, which I hate to say, Russia, the United States is the strongest military in the world. It is not you and Russia.
And that is
so
what
we need to do.
You're
is
correct,
to
Nick,
bring
and that is
that-
why.
Draw the line in the sand and then enforce it.
And that is why, Nick, that I've been advocating several times on this show that the immediate post-war objective, at least we have demonstrated that we have the means potentially to do this immediately after the war, but that is why we should, NATO and the U.S. together should create a global ballistic missile defense system. In my book,
agree with you.
In the Russian view of U.S. strategy, I called this system the Worldwide Strategic Defense Matrix, the acronym WISDOM, which is a very catchy little acronym. But this is what you need: is a global ballistic missile defense, or WISDOM system,
Right.
would effectively neutralize the nuclear arsenals of Russia, China, North Korea, etc.
Yeah.
And you would be able to impose strategic stability on the world by preventing rogue nuclear states or hostile nuclear states from threatening the West or threatening other nations with their nuclear weapons. And that's basically about the only way you're going to be able to do it, because so long as nations like Russia think that they have a shield or a cover with their nuclear arsenal as a means of leverage under which they could operate and use their military power, you're never going to have peace.
That's
and
right.
I
agree with you.
We have to be prepared to impose a new version of the strategy of containment. Some call it neo-containment. I'll tend to agree with that. Neo-containment, which is designed to prevent Russia from further using its military power in threatening the West, and basically allow Russia to collapse under the weight of its own internal contradictions.
Yeah.
Just like we did during the Cold War.
John, the only thing what worries me is by the time that your idea or your proposals would be implemented, Russia could destroy almost all Ukrainian cities. Thank God for corruption in Russia. They don't have enough missiles. They don't have enough
They stole the money.
nothing, and nothing really is working. But if there wouldn't be for corruption, then there would be a great danger of them bombarding all Ukrainian cities 24 hours a day. And who could do anything? This is why when this a few months ago, when they first started to bombard infrastructure and cities, NATO had to warn Russia, one more attack on infrastructure, on civil targets or so on, we will hit you with all the might, because there is no fundamental difference between what they are doing and tactical nuclear weapons. The effect is about the same. So there is a little radiation. Who cares about that radiation? But the ruins of infrastructure and civilian targets are enormous, perhaps even more so than a tactical nuclear weapon. That's what I'm afraid about it. Well, with all that, Ivan, would you like to show us your second?
Yeah, you're reading my thoughts, because it's the video just about Russia destroying Ukrainian cities and how they behave. So let's see it.
Okay.
Have some problem with the video.
Let's
start. Let's try another one.
We'll try another one.
Putin was saying that he made a decision.
Made a decision.
What kind of
Okay.
We're
We're waiting, Vlad.
You know, the guy lies. I mean, you can't trust anything he
He's
says.
a pathological liar.
Yeah.
If you're a pathological liar, how do you make a deal with a pathological liar?
He's worse than Donald Trump, which is impossible. But
Yeah, it's impossible, but he made it. You know, I mean, the thing is, if you have an agreement with Putin, you have no agreement, because he'll turn around and change his mind next day. There is no agreement. Okay.
Okay.
So because
let's
of that,
try
we're gonna
another
use hard
video.
force.
okay.
Right. You got another one? So this one here.
Let's try that video one more time.
Okay.
По проведению специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима.
Я прямо назвал цель. Цель главная – помощь людям на Донбассе.
Либо с завтрашнего дня все это равнять начнем всех подряд. Эти города ебучие, нахуй, хохлов давить, ебаных этих. Равнять, либо все домой, нахуй, в ближайшее время.
Сказали сравнять всю землю. Лисичанск там стирают с лица земли тоже, уже третий день.
Теперь сказали всех хуярить, всех подряд, гражданские, дети, не дети, всех хуярить. Мы когда лиман сдавали, там всех повырезали нахуй. Хохлы ебаные, блядь. Насиловали, резали их там нахуй, расстреливали, блядь. Повырезали нахуй. В Лимане, в Торском, всех нахуй, просто шли, расстреливали. Всех мужиков нахуй, кто помоложе, забирали к себе туда. А этих, короче, баб, вот этих молодых, всех ебли, резали их, расстреливали нахуй.
Наши, говорю, фосфором еще кидают.
А зачем?
Ну, выжигают их там 4000 градусов.
Да. Это хуй лезет, мне кажется.
С этим огнем и падает потихоньку вниз. Там даже кто укрытие, все угорают.
Шла вон мать с 2 детьми. Ну и что, наши вальнули ее при детях. Завалили.
Конечно. Она считается, конечно, тоже враг.
Машина проехала, не увидели там машины или техника, и 2 человека с рощи по гражданке.
Да валите всех нахуй там, ебаный в рот, блядь.
Я понял. Тут
Чего
вся деревня в гражданке.
блядь? Есть гражданская нахуй, в расход, сука, всех. Вот он, нет.
Да, понял.
Комбат, комбриг, замкомбрига. Он говорит, тушите все, что видите, дома все.
Так, наверное, остались собаки.
вообще. Всех тушить.
Ну, за машину с яблоками ничего не говорили? Говорили. У меня приказ сжечь. А ты откуда знаешь, что это за машина и с чем она едет? Ну, мне сказали, если подозрительная личность, без разговоров сжигать.
Сейчас пацаны на разведку ходили, принесли колбасы, майонеза, сало. В магазин зашли? Да нет, люди вон зашли. Да, стволы. Ну да. Танк, причем там минус дом. Живи как хочешь на улице. Так можно, да? Так нужно.
Well, what I heard is that there are orders for direct genocide of Ukrainian nation. Just what they were saying is the kill, you see the suspicious guy, kill, destroy, and this is not sound very optimistic for possible peace initiative and how to make sure that there will be no more war and all these other stories, including all these Chinese initiatives and Turkish and Henry Kissinger and many other gurus who are trying to create a peace. Jonathan, how you see the peace between Russia and Ukraine can be even discussed without complete defeat of Russian forces?
Well, given the politically irreconcilable objectives of Russia and Ukraine, I mean, neither is going to give up its overall political objectives. The Ukrainians can't afford to and expect to survive as a nation or a people. They have to be able to utterly defeat and neutralize the Russian ability to threaten them. And this means not only ballistic missile defense, it also means a very solid defense and counterattack on their own territory, cut off the Crimea, retake it, reoccupy it, and that once military victory within Ukraine over the Russian forces is achieved, then you reinforce with NATO forces and other forces to essentially move the barrier forward, move the barrier eastward, so that the Russians cannot threaten Ukraine or NATO anymore. And especially in a immediate post-war agreement, it would be in the interests of NATO and the United States and Ukraine, as well as Ukraine, to have not only ballistic missile defense forces in Finland, in the Baltic states, in Ukraine, and if we can pressure Belarus into joining, or at least being a neutral state, or arguably joining NATO itself, you create a strong defensive line of ballistic missile defense forces in all those countries with American troops in each of those. It doesn't require a huge number, just a symbolic and a tangible American presence in those countries, manning those ballistic missile defense forces and air defense forces, so that in the future, you basically say to the Russians, any attack against any of these NATO nations, and particularly those nations which have American forces stationed in them, and you have attacked the United States and you are at war with the United States. Make it clear and unequivocal, so that and between two nations with utterly irreconcilable political objectives such as Ukraine and Russia, that is the only way you maintain the peace. You maintain the peace through having the actual ability and the potential ability to neutralize Russia's means of making war.
Jonathan, one more thing I would like to, actually, Nick, I would like to ask you about something about this movie. Very often lately, Russians are being compared to German fascists. However, as far as I know, history of Second World War, unlike Russians, German soldiers of Wehrmacht were never given straight orders to kill innocent civilians. It was
that is correct.
SS, it was Sonderkommandos, it was special forces that were giving such orders, but not regular Wehrmacht. Now, what's happening here in this video, the regular forces of Russia are given orders to kill innocent people. Nick, what you can compare it to?
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, if you look at can't compare it to anything today, Sasha. If you look at it, Hitler was notorious for breaking treaties. If you study the history, which I'm sure Jonathan did and Ivan did, first thing he did, he didn't. His word was meaningless. I'm not going to invade Czechoslovakia, and he did. I'm not going to invade Poland, and he did. He was a megalomaniac with a mission. It sounds familiar? And then they lie all the time. Well, I'm here to protect people. He's not here to protect anybody. So Putin, you could equate, is moving up the food chain close to where Hitler is. And then his demagogues, aka his army. Of course, Ukraine's not going to surrender. Of course, Ukraine's going to fight to the death. If somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to come in your house, I'm going to rape your women, I'm going to butcher you, and I'm going to burn you as soon as I get my hands on you," are you going to surrender to that person, Sasha? Absolutely not. Now, what the United States needs to do is articulate the thing that I just said, what we're going to do. And with our budget being 10 times greater than the Russia, our military at least 10 times bigger than theirs, enforce it. That will stop the war. And unfortunately, our leadership isn't strong enough in Washington, D.C. currently. But when it does change, and it will, then this war will end because we will force Russia out of the Ukraine, push them back, and they can enjoy their Russian thing. They can keep their army and their sadistic demagogues inside the confines of their border. And if they go past their border, we will annihilate them. And that's the name of the game. They have no integrity. I don't respect them at all.
Remember when we discussed history, whether it's useful subject to be learned in schools and universities,
Sure.
and so on. I would like to mention one thing, again, coming from the history of Russia. Russia respects only power.
Mm-hmm.
On all its history, if you remember Crimean wars against England and France or so on, they succumbed to the greater power. The same thing with Japanese war in the early 20th century. So that's what you learn today's Russia. It's almost like if there is no greater power theory, and they can inflict incomparable damages to Ukrainian citizens and kill civilians, and there is no punishment for that.
That's right.
They will continue to do it twice as much, 5 times as much. However, if they encounter the power, even if it's just Ukrainian power, they're inflicting now. We are saying that we are not supporting hitting the targets in Moscow. We, perhaps as the West, NATO, United States, probably not. I do support such actions. Russia have to feel, well, maybe my opinion is not very popular, but what I'm saying is Russian people must get out of their shield and understand that their country is at war, that they could be killed, their children could be killed. So there is some risk involved. If you're fighting a war, when you can be only winner and you can only kill, but you cannot lose, and nobody can kill people of your own, so you will fight that war 24 hours a day for 20 years, 50 years or so, because there is no loss, no losing proposition, nothing. You can just fight as much as you want. However, if you start experiencing that there could be, in fact, losses, okay, it doesn't matter that Ukrainians are right or wrong by inflicting these losses. This is a secondary question. Now, remember the trade in Belgorod, there was a big investigation whether Ukrainians, or actually Russians, used American-made vehicles to cross the border and go into Belgorod. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant because they could buy maybe these machines in a, how they would say, in a Voyentorg, which is a military supermarket. So you go to military supermarket and say, I want 2 of this, 3 of that, and then just, okay, pack it all. Okay, here's the money, and that's it. So nobody knows. And to tell you the truth, I personally, I don't care. If they did what they've done, it's brilliant. If they now have capacity to bomb Moscow and other cities, please do it, and do it 24 hours a day until this idiot, the complete failure, Putin, will finally recognize that he's going to lose the war, he's going to lose the power, he's going to lose his life. It's just a matter of time, and the time is coming. With that, I would like to thank you very much for today's program, and looking forward to see you on Friday with the greatest news of them all, that the attack finally started. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.